Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji.
Welcome back to another episode of The Deconstructed Woman. Today I have Tara back with me as my co-host, and we're going to be talking about how dating has evolved over the years, and as an early 20-something person, what her dating experience or what that looks like. And I wanted to have this conversation with Tara because I was talking to somebody who is probably closer to her mid-20s, and she's already burnt out on the dating apps. And so she's trying to have a dating experience that doesn't rely on a dating app. And so she's finding it to be very challenging to, I guess, for a lack of a better phrase, organically meet people that she runs into in everyday spaces that could potentially lead to a romantic relationship and possibly something more serious for a future commitment. And that's where the conversation piqued my interest. And so it's been something that's been on my mind. And Tara was kind enough to hold this conversation with me.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times dating in older generations' minds or even anything above 20s was very organically done. So now the idea of dating apps is almost sad in some ways because you can see so much about a person in a really easy, quick way. And it also has made short-term relations way easier because you're seeing so many people all at once that you almost get, overwhelmed by the amount of people and the amount of different interests and stuff. And also the fact that social interaction has gone downhill by an extreme amount because social media is so prevalent and you see all of these people who are in happy relationships already that might have organically met or they're using that story. So the idea of becoming burnt out on a dating app or just avoiding it completely in the first place is extremely common, and the idea of people pushing dating apps because that is the only way that people are getting together nowadays is also extremely common.
And what's weird is that if you listen to the commercials or things like that, they have all these stories of people who got married as a result of the dating app, that it almost makes you think like it's going to lead to a long-term relationship. But my friends who are in their 50s and 60s who are divorced or widowed and in the dating world, that's not their experience at all. Their experience is that even gentlemen in those age ranges are looking for a hookup, one night stand, whatever people call it today. And so they are really hesitant because I've also had a couple of my friends find themselves in a meeting somebody for the first time. And when they did not succumb to the pressure to either just hook up, make out, get more physically involved, that the male involved became very aggressive and almost felt threatening. And so I think that there's also this whole worry about what am I signing up for if I do agree to meet with you. And this was a situation where they met for coffee. They didn't meet for a dinner where somebody spent hundreds of dollars on them. This was simply a coffee date. And then there was all this expectation. So I think that it's creepy, honestly. But also, I think when you're older, I think that and I think when you're younger as well, your personal safety should be at the forefront of your mind. And how do you deal with that if you're meeting on differing priorities?
Yeah, I think that a huge problem with dating apps in general is just the expectation behind being on a dating app. I feel like a lot of people use dating apps, and because it's so normalized to have a relationship now where that is at the forefront, like a physical connection is at the forefront of the relationship versus the emotional connection first. So I feel like it's so normalized to not only go on dating apps for only that physical connection, but dating now, there's things like situationships and talking stages and stuff like that where you're not even with the person. You're mainly just connecting with them physically. And that is also so normalized. And not that I have anything against people who go out to only hook up and stuff like that, but when you're using a dating app for primarily that, and you're looking for someone to be with in a long-term connection, and so many people are on there for that short-term stuff, it can be extremely difficult to prioritize being with someone emotionally. And then also, since it's an expectation to be physical, when you don't meet those expectations, I feel like a lot of men can get irritated or aggressive because of that. But it's also normalized to meet up with random people on the internet now, which is not something that ever was done before. Going
Right.
on a first date is normalized, so you're not as scared getting in an Uber with them or going to a private place with them because everyone does it. It's gonna be fine kind of thing. Just the thinking that no matter what, I'll be fine. I also feel like a lot of younger people have that just because they have the idea that, like, they're invincible. So they're like, "No matter what I do, I'm gonna be fine." People do this all the time. So I think that there's a huge safety thing at play there too.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, so my biggest question is that you're a college student and you're at a very big university. And I don't understand, like, why do college students need an app when you're on campus with 5,000 people? What is it that drives that? Because wouldn't you have more success just like doing the typical things like going to parties or going to the campus bar or something like that? Like why do the app?
People what I've found out for me in college, because in my head, college was this place where, like, every single person you sat next to in class, you were gonna become friends with, and you would see people at the library and just go sit down with them and start studying. Like, that's the kind of college it's portrayed usually, and that may have been how college
No.
used to be. Obviously, I can't speak to that, but currently, to start a conversation with someone outside of being forced to, like, you're in a class and you're a project partner or something, it is very low that you will talk to anyone on campus except for the people that you were previously friends with. Even making friends on campus is some people do it very easily, they're very outgoing, but even then, it's more of just, like, a mutual relationship, not as much a friendship. And I feel like on campus, becoming friends with people or talking
No.
to people is almost taboo at this point. Everyone on the quad always has their headphones in and are, like, head down and are walking away. No one is really attempting to make those connections ever because we're so used to doing it on, like, social media, text, calling, all of that kind of stuff, that looking a person in the face and introducing yourself just on a whim is very rare to see. So seeing someone on a dating app first and knowing multiple things about them instead of just going up to someone and getting to know them is just easier almost. It's more, like, convenient in a way. You get to handpick your person before you even have your first, like, hello.
Yeah, I was just thinking about like one of the most interesting conversations I had when I was a college student was sitting in the quad of my university and just enjoying the sunshine or something like that. And I ended up striking up a conversation with somebody next to me who was doing their PhD in literature. And their PhD was about the fairy tales and like how negative the fairy tales are. And it was such a fascinating conversation. Never met this person, never saw this person again. But I'm thinking to myself, man, if I was that person and just struck up a conversation today on a college campus, they probably think that I'm like a weirdo or something. Number one, they give you the message not to interrupt them because they have their headphones on. So they're obviously giving you the message, I'm not available. Do not talk to me. And you're not, it would take a lot to overcome that, right? Like, why would I go out into this person's space to even want to engage with them? But when you were talking, I thought to myself, man, that conversation would have never happened today. And yet, how many years later, I still think it was one of the most interesting conversations I had. But now we've removed that from like a couple generations of people.
Yeah, because I definitely the people I've met in college are probably the most interesting people I've ever met in my life. Everyone has such a different story, that's such a different thing. And thankfully, I've been in situations where I've been able to actually communicate with people, and I have a decent amount of people that are in my life now that while I'm at college, that I'm not outwardly trying to make friends all the time like that because I have them already, which I also think is something that a lot of people in college feel like they find their clique or their niche group of people that they enjoy being around and they don't need to broaden their horizons at all, which is interesting too because you would think that, like, in college is when you wanna meet the most people, and a lot of times I feel like everyone that I know personally doesn't feel like that. I also think that it's interesting because a lot of people don't feel the need to look for someone to be with anymore because they're so fulfilled in their daily life in college. Like, while in college, I feel that there's an issue to where you're so busy or you feel so fulfilled and you fill your schedule enough that you don't feel the need to like add people to your life, which is also, I feel like, a newer thing. I don't think that anyone has really thought like that before. But the independent hustler grind set has really changed the way that people look at interactions that they have, where you don't need people in your life to become the person you want to be. Like, you are enough yourself, which is a good sentiment when you think about it. But in the same breath, human interaction is what makes the world. That's what makes you a human, is being around other people and enjoying being around them. But the mindset that other people are distraction almost, I think, has also interfered with the idea of making friends and stuff.
Yeah. I was just thinking while you were talking about Alyssa and I did a podcast. Our last podcast it was about the isolation epidemic and just the fact that the Surgeon General has talked about how many people are isolated and really not socializing. And yet we have the highest utilization of social media and staying connected by texting or platforms and all this other kind of stuff. But yet it doesn't necessarily, like you're talking about, make us necessarily feel that we are more connected. We are connected digitally, but that the idea that could replace human connection, I think, is really a misnomer and could be dangerous for younger people who are putting all this energy into digital relationships. And what I mean by that is more using electronics to have a relationship by texting or on apps or with chat bots or all the other things that could happen inadvertently. I feel like that's not necessarily panning out to be a good thing, right? So that's worrisome as well, especially as I have grandkids who are now that their world is going to be substantially influenced by technology.
It was one of those things where I'm like, what is this? Like, where is this coming from? With the expansion of ChatGPT to being like a normalized thing, now people are coming out with chat rooms where you're just talking to an AI person who is telling you what you want to hear. And I think that there's a lot of groups out there, especially I feel of men I see more often, who have, almost due to social media, a resentment against women, which is, I feel like, very interesting to me because they will take basic things that women do and turn it into this resentment of them. And now that there's chat rooms for this kind of stuff, and then AIs, that is the perfect woman, quote unquote, because they say exactly what you want to hear, will agree with you on a lot of different things that real women who have opinions won't. There's a lot of people taking that and running and not looking to make real human connections or to make real relationships with people because they have this person that's going to always agree with them or always hype them up for every single thing they do, even if they're wrong. I feel like that's a huge thing that's starting now too, that we're going to see a huge push of, is this AI chatting. And we already have started to sever the idea of human connection being a necessity by having basic social media. So I can't even imagine what now having a chat where you don't have to interact with a human to feel like you are is going
Well,
to do to people.
and I think it connects to something else you said too before, which I wanted to come back to, and this is a natural place to bring it up, is you were talking about on the dating apps and how overwhelming it can be because you're seeing like all these different people. And the one thing I thought about, I've watched people show me like their dating apps and how you can just flip through all these people. But I guess my observation of watching people do that is, how do you even know? Like, you're totally judging them on what they present to you, right? What they're putting forward, the picture that they use, and the hobbies and things and interests that they say that they have. And where is the patience to work through some of those issues in real life? If this is a partner that you're going to marry, is there this assumption that relationship is going to take work? If you're swiping for the perfect person that fits the image that you want them to look like, and they have all the same things that you have interest in, are you setting yourself up for this belief that person is supposed to now match you so well? And then it takes the responsibility of both people to work hard in a relationship, because I got to be honest with you, You got to work hard. You're not going to find the Xerox copy of you. If you do, you'll be bored. And if you don't, you'll have conflict. And so it's like, how do you learn how to manage and navigate normal issues that are going to come up in any relationship if you're swiping looking for this perfect person? And does that make you believe that there is that perfect situation out there? Or am I just oversimplifying it? You tell me.
I think that it's hard because some people go into dating apps who wanted to meet someone organically and it didn't work out. So now this is where they are. They're stuck with it. And they'll start going through and they'll start swiping on most people. They're like, I enjoy this person. I want to get to know this person. Then there's the person that is like the avid dating app user or has been on there for a while. And they are looking for their exact copy. Like they're looking for their clone. They want them to have the same interests, the same hobbies. They want them to put the same piece of music on there, have the same humor, have good pictures up. And I feel like it sets this unreal expectation of a person you're looking for in the forefront because you're never going to find the exact clone to you. You're never going to find someone who you want who is perfect for you, I think is the reality that it sets up versus being with someone who has different interests than you and has different hobbies, but they can share those with you. That's you don't need someone who's your exact hobby. You just need to have someone that like matches you well, I feel. And I feel like most people now, because they have so many options given to them, it's almost like they're not seeing these people as real people. They're seeing them as their clone, pretty much, who they want to be or who they would want to be with instead of seeing them as real people. So when you're just sitting there swiping and looking at all these people and you're like overwhelmed with the amount of people that are on there, you could swipe forever and not find what you deem as perfect, but you're not giving anyone else a chance because they haven't fit this fantasy you've made in your head. Versus when you organically meet someone, like you can start talking to them and slowly build up to a point where you're like, this is a person that I enjoy being around.
And that's where this chat room, God, that's pretty scary that I feel like an adult man can join a chat room or group or and have a very defined female bot that is going to do nothing but stroke their ego or reinforce what they're saying. So that in relationships, even I'm trying to imagine a situation where you do find that clone of you, right? Say for whatever reason you go on your app and you do find an exact clone of you, which I mean really defeats the purpose. But say for argument's sake, you do find that person. The difficulty is that they also come from a different family. They have a different environment that they were grown in. And so even though you're an exact clone, there's going to be enough differences about you that's going to create conflict that you still have to figure out how to resolve. And that's just natural. And so now we're not learning those natural conflict resolution kinds of strategies that is only worth it if you're with a partner that's, you want to make that effort for. But if you can like dump and run and then you can go ahead and find somebody else because you can swipe and find something, like all those skills that you need to have a healthy relationship is really being just eliminated slowly over time. So where is all this going to go? I don't know. It's a weird kind of what does the future hold for us?
I also think that veering slightly away from the dating app idea is just the fact that once you get into a relationship, the idea I know I was talking to my mom and like my grandma recently just about how the dating world is now. And I brought up the idea of a situationship and a talking stage and friends with benefits. And they're like, oh, we have no idea what you're talking about. And it's because I feel like this generation specifically will find so many different labels to put on something to not make it be something that they actually have to deal with, something that they can easily leave, something that they're not tied down to. Because at the first sign of something happening, they're going to leave instead of putting in the work. And by defining a relationship, you're almost making a commitment to that person that you're going to at least try. And so by making all of these different labels that don't commit yourself, you can then absolve yourself from the fact of being a person who has to try. And I think that's a huge issue that it stems a lot from dating apps because you can find someone so easily, but it also just stems from the lack of commitment that is perpetuated now because it's not needed you don't have to be committed to someone to be with them. And then at the first sign of trouble, you can leave. You don't have to stay around. You don't have to try to commit to them anymore because you never were in the first place.
But I do think that as I've seen in my own family or in my own friends and their children, there's a natural like developmental path that everybody takes. Your 20s are your time to explore yourself, learn yourself, try different things. Maybe that kind of stuff is fine. But I will tell you, by the time you hit like your mid 30s, you're looking for something different and you're looking for something more meaningful. But I don't feel like people necessarily know how to go about that. Like today, I was talking to somebody, and this person is 33 and was saying, like, I think like my take on it is she's having a mid 30s crisis and she's really focused on her career. I don't think that this is what I want to do. I think that, but when you listen to the person talk, they're talking about the fact that they haven't had a serious relationship in over 5 years, that they've been in the same type of work for 10 years. And based on certain reasons, they've moved away from their family. And so they don't have very much contact with their family because they just live far away from each other. And to me, it's like I can see the writing on the wall. Like you can say it's your work. I don't think it's your work. I think the fact is that you're not connected. You're not feeling like you have a tribe. Like you feel like you have, whether it's one person or a group of people, like that closeness is not there. And what do you do with that now? Because I got to be honest with you, as you get older, not necessarily that women want to have children and that biological clock is ticking. I think that's really not something that's current as much anymore. Like I don't hear that anymore. I just think it's more about you've done your 20, now you're in your 30s, but there's no opportunity for a relationship. And what are we doing? Are we just treading water? Are we thinking that somebody's going to fall into our lives? Are we thinking that I'm going to become a workaholic and I don't need a relationship? I feel like, but that's not surprising to me. Looking back at the people I have seen already walk down that path, and there's nothing that really is going to substitute for most people of wanting to be in. I don't honestly, and I feel like I sound like I'm 80 years old and born in the 1930s, a committed relationship where you're going to have a future together. And I don't believe that's right for everybody, but I do think that you're going to go through a period of time where you're going to feel like something is missing. And you may look at all these different things, but it may not be what you think it is.
Yeah, I think that people definitely play down the idea of just human connection in general now. There's a lot of times where I feel like, especially with the idea that on social media, people post the best version of themselves or the best things that are happening in their lives. And so a lot of people who are feeling this isolation or that are feeling the lack of human connection are posting on social media to try to get the dopamine that you would usually get from being with someone, and talking about how happy they are being by themselves and how happy they are living alone, how happy they are not having human connection. They haven't spoken to anyone in 5 days. They stay at home all day and work. And when that's perpetuated across social media too, you start to forget that's something that you want specifically. Even if these people aren't lying to themselves or lying to the world and they're not trying to get that dopamine rush and it's something they enjoy, when you're told over and over again that this is people's way of being a feminist or that this is the life that you should be living and that it's so peaceful and relaxing, when you're told that over and over again, you start to forget that human connection is something that you even wanted. So like being in that kind of situation is just, it can be isolating itself when you believe that you should be isolated from everyone.
We were talking before we jumped on this recording about, I was doing a quick search on the dating apps and I could not believe that there is Tinder for teenagers. Tinder that has a reputation for like basically hookup, period. Now we've marketing that to teenagers and I wonder, is that something, if I had a teenage daughter or son and they came up to me and said, yeah, I met this person on teenage Tinder or Tinder for teenagers, I would like want to make sure that that didn't happen, because in my mind, I'm thinking, because I think it's like 13 to 18-year-olds or something like that. Like, why would I want my kid to meet somebody on Tinder for teenagers? It just creates this image in my mind that is not a healthy place. And so now combine the fact that these apps are available for young teens and add to that, we are normalizing the fact that all we need is connection through apps. and that now I'm feeling pressured if that's not enough for me, that something's wrong with me and now I'm the broken one, when really all these people are not even being honest about what is actually their life experience or what their experience is or how happy they are, because it does feel like to me that on social media people don't talk about the horror that's happening to them. They talk about all the wonderful things, and I wonder how much of that is fantasy versus real.
I also think it's interesting that you brought up the teenage Tinder again because the more I think about it, I remember that when I was a teenager, so young teenager, like 14, 15, there was apps that were connected to Snapchat, which is just a giant social media platform, where it was called like Monkey, where you could like FaceTime people. There was Omegle that you could go on where you just like it connected you to random people. There was Yubo, which was pretty much a dating app, but was marketed as find friends near you and stuff like that. So it's been going on for a while, but it hasn't been marketed so generally. And I feel that it's becoming more normalized to the point where now it can be. Because I remember telling my mom about Yubo and her being like, please never go on that. Do not ever touch that. Stay away from it. Because at that point, I was 13 maybe, and it was marketed like 12 to 17. She's like, I do not want you meeting 17-year-olds on a random app that you guys can just start talking all of a sudden. And also the safety that goes into protecting kids who aren't telling their parents about this kind of stuff and are just downloading these apps and now talking to these random people. And you don't have to verify anything on a dating app. You can just put in that you're 13 years old and start talking to someone. So the safety of teenagers being on a dating app is completely, extremely, you can't control any of that. And that's horrific in the first place, let alone an app that's known for hookup culture being marketed towards teenagers and anyone can get on there. Like the safety being at the forefront again is a huge issue there.
So that's one of the questions I had, because it almost made it sound like what Tinder is representing is that there's a Tinder for teenagers, which is 13 to 18, and then there's Tinder for people who are above 18. But it did cross my mind, like, how do you fact check that? How do you know who these people are? And I didn't take the time to look at all that, but it sounded to me like it was on a hope and a prayer. There wasn't really any, how do you substantiate that? I have no idea.
Yeah, I know so I had a couple friends who used Yubo just because that was a big thing at the time. It was a flash trend where it was there for 2 weeks, but you could verify yourself on Yubo by putting in a state ID. But the problem is they can't have you verify if you're like 13 because you don't have any of that kind of stuff. There was some people that were verified on Yubo, but they were like 17. You can't, if you're 13, you can connect with an 18-year-old, which is an issue in itself. On top of that, when you sign up for an app like Yubo or an app like Tinder for Kids, there is no way that they can confirm how old you are because most of your stuff you don't have, and they lose 90% of their customers doing that. So they instead just do it on a hope and a prayer. But because of that, quite literally anyone could get onto it. You can make a fake email and get on there. Anyone can be anyone on there, and that is a big issue. Catfishing is a big issue on regular dating apps with adults, let alone a dating app that's targeted towards teenagers.
Right. Who don't have the experience or knowledge, and they trust everybody because they're innocent, because they don't have that life experience. I don't know, Tara. I feel like I'm going to get off this podcast and I'm going to be like, my God, like, how do you protect the kids who are just becoming introduced? And I wanted to run a question by you because you represent the young people to me. So one of the things that Alyssa had brought up in the last episode on social media was that her first graders, I don't know, parents are trying to put a petition together to have parents sign off to say that they would not let their kids have a phone until they get to middle school. So they're trying to now institute like this buy-in for safety in numbers, so that instead of kids saying, I want a cell phone, everybody has a cell phone, that theoretically, if you were part of this first grade, you could say, no, not everybody does, because we signed the petition with all these other families. And so there's at least this many people who don't believe in that. Do you think that would actually fly if it was done in a school? I find it interesting, but I could see both sides.
I think that the sentiment behind it is really good, but the issue I fear that they will have with that is one, that a lot of parents just don't like schools telling them what to do. It's a huge one. So if it's a thing through the school and not just parents banding together, it might be hard to institute anyways. A second one is now phones So when I was in middle school, I had a flip phone. So I couldn't do much on it except for call my mom to be like, who's picking me up from school? It was not a common thing. A lot of people had flip phones, but no one really talked to each other on them because they were hard to use. And then I didn't get a real phone until I was going into high school. So we never really had the issue of phones when I was younger. But I do know that now iPads can do the same exact thing as a phone. iPods can do the same exact thing as a phone. You could text people off of your TV. People have smart fridges that you can talk to people on. There's usually laptops in the home that do pretty much everything that a phone does. The sentiment behind not giving someone a phone, I think, is nice in the fact that they won't have access to social media as often and that their parents like wouldn't or would be able to monitor what they're doing easier. But if there's any kind of electronic in the home, there is still a large chance of all of the things that are done on a phone being done. And I think that it also takes away the fact that people can't get flip phones like that anymore. If you give someone a flip phone, you need to buy minutes. And there's a lot of times where parents just add you onto a line so that they can monitor all that stuff anyways. And so the safety of if a kid is now old enough, you think, to walk home from the bus stop by themselves, having a phone on them is a safety thing too, in my head.
Well,
That could just be, again, the generation thing where I had a phone when I was younger. So now in my head, that's how I justify.
I
having a
will
phone.
say that Alyssa said that her phone company, for $10, you could add a phone line that's tied to like a kid's iWatch, but the iWatch is limited to, you can set it to 4 people that they can call. But
Right.
so it's limited to just those 4 numbers that are pre-programmed by the parent. And they can't do a lot of things on like a regular iPhone. So I think that there are some solutions that can bridge the gap where you don't have to give them a smartphone, even though I would have never thought of that technology on an iPhone watch for a kid. But if you can put those kinds of safety controls on there, I think that's interesting. But I think, like you mentioned, the sentiment is good. It's trying not to get kids addicted to phone use and the dependency on phones more so than they're already going to be, so that their whole self image and ego is tied to this phone that with bullying and everything else can be as destructive as a positive influence. So anyway, that sort of is a tangent that I went on because you represent that young group to me. And I'm like, oh, it's interesting. And not that's the answer for everything, but it was good to learn that our options for my grandkids as they get a little bit older, if their parents wanted to give them some safety parts in place, but not at the same time open them up to all the different things that a phone could do for them. Going back and tying it back to our original conversation of dating, any last minute thoughts before we close this out?
I don't think so. I think that we just need to keep in mind the changes that dating has had. And I feel like there is still ways out there to meet people organically and join clubs and stuff. But definitely, especially if you were in a generation where it was easy to organically date, getting back onto dating apps it's a minefield. So it's definitely going to be difficult. It's not an easy task.
Oh, yeah, for sure. My friends who have dipped their toe in that pool have said it's really awkward and it's really not a dating app as much as it's a hookup app.
Mhm.
And they're clearly not comfortable with it because this is also the age of group of people where you're not going to jump into bed the first time you see somebody. That's so outside of the experience of most people over the age of, I don't know, 45, 50, maybe that's fair. That it's really, that they definitely feel like a fish out of water. But I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me again. I love our conversations and I feel like there's so much to talk about from a 20-year-old's perspective compared to my 57-year-old perspective. And want to reach out to our listeners and let them know that we want to know your input. We want to hear what your thoughts are about dating, pros, cons at your age. I know we have lots of listeners that are above 50 and several that are 30 and below. Please do share your feedback. Let us know if we got something wrong. If you want to advocate for the app dating and that's something that you think is great, let us know why. You can reach out to us through the Facebook podcast community. You can do that where you hear your podcast and reach out to us that way. And so we definitely want to hear from you. And until next time, thank you so much for tuning in. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.